Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm here with James Valliant, who is often on the Daily Objective and on his own show and in members only study group that he does. And yet we haven't really, I think, utilized you for your main area of expertise, right? As of yet. So James, as I think hopefully some or most of you know, is a former federal prosecutor. So today, sorry?
Was a local prosecutor, a state prosecutor for California.
Okay, sorry. Thanks for correcting me.
Sure.
But I think your expertise will be relevant probably to the entire U.S. legal system. Although I'm sure you're knowledgeable about maybe the UK system, but yeah, this is mostly U.S. relevant. So
do have a Juris Doctorate, and I was for almost 18 years a professional prosecutor in the United States. I am familiar with the laws in the English-speaking world. And yes, my expertise in this area has been underutilized, so let's utilize it a little.
Yeah, so I strongly encourage everybody to send in your super chats if you have any major pending legal issues. Now is the time to solve them. I don't know. Actually, maybe we should have some sort of disclaimer here, but I'll leave that to you because
okay, yeah,
And so yeah, we have a few questions from our members at the platinum level. And above, who are welcome to send in questions to Daniel, and we'll ask them for free. Anybody else can send questions through the super chat, as I mentioned. And I'll also mention that next Monday is the 3-year anniversary of the Daily Objective. It is 3 years exactly from the first episode of this show, which originally, to get Nikos to go along with it, I told him it'll be maybe a couple of weeks or so that we'll try this out, and it's been almost 3 years, so I hope you'll join us for that. And we already have, I believe, the episode schedule, so you can set up a notification for that. James, do you have any opening remarks for us while people think of their question?
Well, I do want to say that, of course, that I cannot be giving individualized legal advice, and nothing I say should be taken as individualized legal advice. If you have a particular legal issue in your life, do seek professional legal advice on that. On the other hand, I'm happy. I've taught law and at the University of San Diego as a lecturer, and I'm happy to answer open questions, theoretical questions, questions about the law themselves, but understand that is my view. That's all. Sort of a legal disclaimer for legal opinions, that's all.
Okay, so let's get to the first question.
Okay.
In light of the Durham Report on Russian intervention claims during the 2016 election, which was scathing about the FBI behavior, could someone sue the FBI? Is the Bureau prosecutable either individually or as an organization via a lawsuit or ombudsman or watchdog, if there is one?
Well, the general answer to the question, let's back up. When can one sue the government? The assumption walking in the door is a doctrine known as sovereign immunity. It comes from, yes, in the United States, even we have this doctrine, sovereign immunity, and it does come from merry old England, Great Britain, the notion that the king can't be sued. The king is above the law. And that doctrine was just implicitly, without really any constitutional authorization, mind you, adopted in the United States. So the presumption is that the government, unless it has a specific law permitting you to sue the government can't be sued as such. And the doctrine is known as sovereign immunity. Now, the federal government has passed a law called the Federal Tort Claims Act, so that in cases of ordinary negligence, let's say a government, a post office delivery truck engages in ordinary negligence and hits your car, hits your vehicle, can you sue the government as you would any other driver who negligently hit your car? Yes. Under those cases, the government has said, in cases of ordinary negligence where we're acting as ordinary employers, you can sue us for damages as you would any other employee. Law enforcement is special. Law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, people like that, cops, FBI agents, they have special immunity granted to them, so long as they're engaged in good faith basis in their investigation, so long as they are doing things by the rules along the way, they're really immune from any kind of prosecution. Even if they violate rules, they're generally immune from prosecution because they're internal laws. Now, we have a Civil Rights Act. You can sue the FBI sometimes, but it has to be under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, under the section 1983 of that law, which says that if there's a constitutional violation on the government's part of your constitutional rights, you can sue them for a civil rights violation. Typically, if it's because you're a racial minority, say, or a religious minority, say, and the government is going after you for that purpose, you can then sue the government for violating your civil rights. Now, back to the Durham Report fact scenario. There appear to be no specific civil rights issues here. It is not as though I can see a violation, an easy violation of a lawsuit under Section 1983 and the typical immunity of law enforcement officials, the FBI, the Justice Department, who did massive wrong here. Don't get me wrong, don't make any mistake. In my view, the Durham Report revealed terrible corruption at the highest levels of the Department of Justice. They have simply, in the 2020 presidential election, they bought into a Hillary Clinton campaign dirty trick, a lie. She bought a lie, in effect, from a foreign spy, and that lie became the basis for an investigation against Trump. The whole Russia collusion thing, which they did a whole special counsel investigation on with Mueller. It came up with nothing, absolutely nothing about Russian collusion against Trump. Most of the accusations were shown to be absolutely false. In fact, during the course of it, there were real abuses. There's a foreign intelligence surveillance court that was created under the Patriot Act after 9/11. And it gave special powers to this court to authorize wiretaps, search warrants, secret investigations of people without their knowledge. And it's an ex parte secret court. So the government can go into court and say, give me this. They don't have to notify the other side. All the proceedings are done in secret. This special FISA court, FISA court, was lied to. They were outright lied to in order to get these wiretap things. Now, can these people be individually sued? Unless there is a real basis, it's really internal rules that govern them. They have violated internal Justice Department rules. They can be disciplined as lawyers. They can be disciplined as within the Justice Department as employees of the Justice Department, but that would require the Department of Justice to do it. Generally speaking, they are, unless there's a specific criminal provision that they have violated, of course, they can't violate the law like anyone else. They can't commit a crime. But if they had a FISA authorization for this search warrant, the people who executed that search warrant are legally immune. So in my view, we need to have laws that make criminal violations out of high-level Justice Department officials' lies and actions. We lack such provisions. More than that, we have to let the pernicious provisions of the Patriot Act go out of existence. Many of them are sunsetted and have times that, they go out of existence. We should let all those happen and let this terrible, pernicious law die. The secret star chamber called the FISA court is, in my view, totally pernicious and needs to be eliminated. It is a violation of the spirit and, in my view, many implicit ideals of the Bill of Rights. So terrible things were done, but I don't think that we're going to see prosecutions here. Could they have been prosecuted? Did Durham come to fallacious conclusions about certain people not being prosecutable, like Hillary Clinton? That is a matter of legal opinion. In my view, Hillary Clinton could well have been prosecuted. I disagree with James Comey, the FBI director's opinion in 2020, that said no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute Hillary Clinton for destroying evidence in a federal investigation, which is what she did demonstrably. Her server took top secret documents and violated the rules about handling them. Her server was penetrated by foreign sources. We know that information was compromised, and she wasn't even a president of the United States or even a vice president like Biden and Trump. If Biden and Trump can be investigated for their handling of top secret documents, Hillary Clinton surely should have been in a much more massive, much more egregious, and much more consequential case. I was that reasonable prosecutor who would have been happy to prosecute Hillary Clinton at the time. And in that respect, I disagree with the Durham Report. Hillary Clinton should have been prosecuted. But that's my answer. It's sort of long-winded, but I hope that answers the question.
Well, the next question is also, so this question was from Marco and Richard, and as is the next one, and we have a few that came in by super chat. So why isn't there a single federal legal system for running federal elections? For example, presidential. Is it a historical quirk or is it in the Constitution? Is it set in stone or states can tweak it?
Oh, that is very much set in stone. In fact, let's back up. There is no constitutional provision requiring any election for the President of the United States. When in the Constitution of the United States, the President of the United States is the method by which he's selected, he or she is selected, is set in the Constitution itself. It is the Electoral College. There were some people at the time who said, why don't let the Congress elect the president? As in parliamentary systems, if you can get a majority, the prime minister is the leader of the party that gets the majority. And so why not have a similar system here? Some of the framers thought, we'll have Congress elect the president. Nope, that was rejected. We'll create a new body, a separate body, based in effect on the representation, though, in Congress. And it's an undemocratic thing, totally. Wyoming, big state, it has the number of members to the House of Representatives is proportionate to population. Each state gets a number of members of the House, and those must be elected to the House of Representatives. The Senate, they get 2 senators, no matter what their population. So a state like Wyoming can have 2 senators and only 1 representative based on its population. Whereas a state like California can have dozens of representatives based on its population and still only get 2 senators. That is an undemocratic proportion that each state sort of gets to balance out, in effect, the heavily populated areas against the less populated areas. That was intentionally put in an undemocratic way. So the state itself is assigned a number of electors. California gets the number of electors for president, that is the number of representatives they get in the House based on population, plus their 2 senators. And that will determine the number of electors for the presidential electoral college that they get. Now, who decides who the electors are? The state legislature. The Article 2, which defines the presidency and how it gets elected in the Constitution, says that the state legislature shall determine the manner in which the electors for president are decided. So guess what? There doesn't need to be a single popular election in any of the states for president. The president of the United States is not elected under our Constitution by the people. The state legislature could say, we decide who the electors are. The state legislature could say, well, let's do it by flipping a coin. The state legislature could say that any process the state legislature decides to pick the electors is okay. Now, all 50 states by this point have a procedure by which there are popular elections in each state, which determine how the electors will vote. But those rules on how they have to vote, whether they're bound by certain rules before they go in, or whether they're not bound by certain rules, vary from state to state to state. And so let's go to this last election where Donald Trump claimed that he had the election stolen from him. In my view, the second that the state legislatures had certified their electors, it was over. The second those electors met in the Electoral College and elected Joe Biden, it was completely over. And Donald Trump at those points should have said, congratulations, President-elect Biden, but he did not. He still said it was corrupt. He still was going to resist. He still was going to say it wasn't the proper election, but it was. Joe Biden was properly and constitutionally elected president, whatever we say about the elections within the local states, because it is the state legislatures which determine the process by which electors for president are chosen. We simply happen to have, thanks to the will of 50 states, popular elections to determine how those electors vote. But even those rules about how the electors are bound and how they're chosen are all determined by state legislators. So we do not have a national election. There is no such thing as a national election in the United States. We have 50 state elections under state law, which choose the electors for the presidency of the United States. That's the answer. It is built into the Constitution. It is a fundamentally, and I'm going to just say this outright, fundamentally non-democratic way of going about it. The states are meant to choose the president under our system, not necessarily the voters. People don't really realize that. And the existence of the Senate and the disproportionate way in which states of lower population are given a greater weight to their vote is built into the system, just as having a Senate, which, if you think about it, every state, regardless of its population, gets 2 senators. This is true of Little Rhode Island, and this is true of New York State. Nearby, they have the same number of senators. The Senate is, again, a non-democratic element. And there are many such non-democratic elements that are built into the United States Constitution.
So we have several super chats. We have a couple without questions. So thank you, Gail. Thank you, Rob. Rob says, James helped me personally 2 years ago untangle a personal legal matter in which I had been very wrongly accused and in which probable cause had been significantly abused. Thank you.
That is true. And I was happy to help you, Mr. Flinton.
So we have a few more questions that came in. So Simon asks, how may LA people prosecute or get rid of the current corrupt DA?
The great tragedy that's happened, of course, and people ignore this, on the left. People make maybe perhaps too much of it on the right, but the fact is that in major cities in the United States, the elected DAs no longer prosecute the state laws as they're given. When I was a prosecutor, and I have been retired now as a prosecutor for several years, I would read a law, California law, that says the prosecutor shall charge the person with this when there is a factual basis. I took that as a command. So if there was a gun allegation, in California, we passed a law, use a gun, go to prison. So if you had personally used a gun in the commission of a crime, that would make it prison mandatory and add time to your sentence if you use the gun. Well, that gun allegation, for example, by the DA of LA is no longer being filed, even though the law requires the DA to file such allegations when they are present. And using the sloppy doctrine of prosecutorial discretion, we have DAs across the country who are refusing to enforce the existing laws of their state. And that I regard as totally corrupt and pernicious. And we see crime increasing. Now, has crime been worse in the history of the United States? Yes, back, for example, in the 1970s. When there was all kinds of another wave of left-inspired criminal law, quote, reforms, there was a wave of crime that occurred that was even worse than what's going on today. So the right sometimes loses context there. But on the other hand, do we see an outbreak of all kinds of crimes today because of the intentional ideological refusal by elected DAs across the country, especially in certain big cities, to enforce the law. And the laws that they refuse to enforce, in my view, are important laws that require severe and serious prosecution. As I say, crimes of violence, crimes of theft, crimes that all of us as objectivists agree should be crimes, and the victims there deserve a strong enforcement of. But that very process, as well as some other things such as bail reform in New York and other such things, have caused a terrible outbreak of crime in US cities.
I was muted. Well, as I said, we're celebrating 3 years, so it's only 3 years of Zoom. So I'm still learning how to use it. Equal, Equal to Reality asks a question that is on the minds of many of those who are not in America. What is the fastest legal way to immigrate to the U.S.?
Probably just informally through the Mexican border right now. Unfortunately, the border is a mess because we have a quasi-black market in immigration. Whether it's a black market in drugs or a black market in people, it's basically the same effect. When you make something a crime and then sort of only semi-enforce the thing you've made a crime, which is the way we've approached, say, in certain areas, drug laws. Well, we'll look the other way. You haven't legalized drugs, and so the drugs out there are still corrupted and will kill people. Let's take the analogy to immigration. We have all kinds of laws that restrict perfectly peaceful, law-abiding people who just want to come into this country to work. We prevent them by the tens of thousands from coming in all the time. And instead of simply focusing on terrorists or criminals and preventing them from coming in at the border, which I think would be irrational. Objectivists disagree about this, mind you. There's a range of opinion about how much border we should have at all, and whether the federal government should be involved in the regulation of immigration at all. But it seems to me that under any rational objectivist approach to this, we could only keep out criminals, actual criminals or terrorists, or people, say, with deadly infectious diseases that are contagious, things like that, a physical danger to people inside the country. So long as they're a peaceful, law-abiding person who wants in this country, it would be a violation of their rights and my rights as an existing resident and citizen of the United States to prevent them from immigrating. But what we have is this quasi-legalized and quasi-criminalized system of immigration at the Mexican border, which in effect, just like the war on drugs does, it subsidizes organized crime. These horrific Mexican cartels, which engage in human trafficking, selling children to sex slavery, other kinds of slavery. You want to know why the corrupted fentanyl that no one can tell the quality of gets into this country, mostly through the Mexican border, right? And just as if we'd had legal fentanyl, people could tell the quality and the safety, and young people wouldn't be dying every day from fentanyl. So if we had a legal immigration system, those cartels would not be subsidized in their criminal activities. So what's happening at the border is dangerous. It's corrupt. I would advise people not to do that for personal safety reasons, but it's very easy, in effect, to get into this country these days, so long as you're willing to risk your life and work with a Mexican cartel. Now, trying to bypass a Mexican cartel to get over the Rio Grande into the United States is probably easier, though, than dealing with all of the, goddamn red tape that the government has against people who just want to come to this country to study or work. We have to have a complete reform of our immigration laws, totally legalizing most immigration to this country. And until and unless we do that, we're going to have a system which will make it nearly impossible for good people to, I'm having a dog issue there, making it impossible for good, honest people to immigrate. We're going to continue to have this kind of monstrous problem where people are forced to deal with Mexican cartels or try and get around Mexican cartels to get into this country. So you want my personal advice? Try and do it the legal way. There are some ways of, and by the way, if you just get a visitor's visa and disappear into the United States, they probably won't pursue you anyway. That may be the safest and easiest, because you don't have to go through the border and you don't have to go through the federal red tape. So does it sound like I'm advising people to violate the federal law? Well, you take a chance when you violate the federal law, but I think the federal law is evil. So I would try and do it the legal way. It's my personal advice, try and do it the legal way. If you can't do it the legal way and you need to get out of your country, just apply for a visa. If you can get a visitor's visa here and just disappear into the population, you'll probably get away with it. You'll probably get away with it. But the way most people are coming in these days is unfortunately through this horrific scene at the US-Mexican border that we have today.
And yeah, as you mentioned, none of this is legal advice or life guidance.
Well, it's the only
We
advice
wish
I
you,
really.
if you want to move to the US, we wish you all the best. It is, I think, despite the direction it's going, still the greatest country in the world. Okay, we have a bunch of well, we have actually a few more super chats. So thank you, Free Trade. Adherent of Lady Columbia asks, do you think that the sort of behavior that Maricopa County has displayed, that they have sown their own behavior, the vitriol they have garnered? The question is actually.
I have tremendous sympathy for the people who live along the US-Mexican border. Private property owners, because there is no orderly entry, because of the laws against immigration in the first instance, and then the Biden administration's turning the other way and sort of ignoring those laws. That combination creates a nightmare situation for landowners near the US-Mexican border. They are often overrun, their homes get invaded, their property gets damaged and destroyed. They're chasing off people from their property, which is being damaged. And that is all the fault of the federal government and its ridiculous mismanagement of the border, the US-Mexican border. So there's part of me that has total sympathy for, say, the Maricopa County sheriff, who's trying to do everything, and just like the governor of Texas is trying to do, and they'll put up their own barbed wire to prevent, to channel sort of the immigration of the people just free flowing across the border, or they'll try and enforce their own local laws against trespass, vandalism, vagrancy, to go after quote illegal immigrants. I think again, what they're doing though is a secondary. So at the end of the day, I'm not a sympathizer with the Maricopa County sheriff. He is in effect doing what the federal government says it's going to do, but which I don't think they should be doing at all. That is to say, keeping people out and only making it harder for them to get in, and only making a greater profit incentive for these cartels to engage in the kind of slave traffic that's going on at the US border today, in my view.
Adherent of Lady Columbia sends another super chat, says, I sadly am a resident of Illinois and find myself wondering on the potential application of state level electoral colleges as places like Chicago act as a cancer on the rest of the state's people.
Well, this is the idea that the founding fathers had, and it is especially true with the concentration, since the founding of the United States, the concentration of the population in big cities. We don't want a system wherein New York City and Los Angeles and Chicago are the only people who really decide who the president of the United States is. If that were the case, we would have governments that very much reflected these insane local leftist governments that are now in control of local governments and are busy destroying what the once beautiful American cities. I mean, you look at San Francisco today, you look at Chicago today, great cities. Oh, the cities of the West Coast, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, LA, used to be just beautiful places that I remember fondly. They're being systematically destroyed by their local governments that are in nearly every case in the cities controlled by heavily left-leaning politicians. If you don't want that to be writ large across the nation with a president every time, support the Electoral College. The Electoral College is designed to balance out that so that different regions of the country are represented in the decision to for who the president is. And so I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that it's undemocratic, and I think it really helps America to have something like the Electoral College. Now, there are states that are engaged in doing things like whatever the national vote tally is, whoever wins the popular vote tally will get all our Electoral College votes. I think Colorado has such a law. I think those laws are awful. Those are states surrendering their locally proper disproportionate voice in their say-so and who gets elected president. They're surrendering that They're surrendering that, and it's going to cause terrible, in the name of abstract name of pure democracy, which I'm not a big fan of. In the name of this abstract pure democracy, they're surrendering actually their own disproportionate weight in selecting the president, going against their own state interests, in my view. That's a nightmare. And I personally oppose, but states can do that, as I explained. State legislatures can determine how their electors are chosen and how they have to vote. So that is permissible under our Constitution, but I would oppose it politically strongly everywhere they would try that.
Thank you, Christopher, for your super chat. Philosophical Zombie Hunter asks, in your opinion, how much have housing regulations and environmental impact reviews reduced the supply of houses?
Zoning regulations are, of course, evil and counterproductive. They only really began in the United States in the 1920s with the progressive era, as you might imagine. But studies have been done. One of my law professors, in fact, at law school, did a complete study on zoning laws and their effect on business formation, and even land use concentration. You know, we want the industrial stuff over here, the commercial stuff over here, the residential stuff over here, land use regulations. Well, if you compare, for example, Houston, which for a long time had no zoning laws, with Dallas, a comparable Texas city, which had zoning laws almost from the beginning, there was more land use concentration in Houston. There was more new business formation in Houston. Zoning laws not only freeze neighborhoods, create and make the changes that inevitably occur over time economically inflexible. And so it creates these sort of ghetto type areas, these dead zones economically. And that's exactly what happens under zoning. So yeah, zoning in my view is not only unconstitutional, it is a bad idea, and it reduces business formation, and it's even counterproductive to its own purposes, as study after study have shown. Other regulations, EPA regulations, things like that. Yeah, every regulation adds cost to starting a business. Now think about that. Every regulation is pro-coercive monopoly. If our left-wing friends are against monopoly abuses by companies, they should realize that every single time they pass an economic regulation, it adds to the cost of entering that field, of entering making a business that goes into that field. And that makes it all the easier for the existing companies to abuse their position. All these rules that, for example, against Uber or Lyft, all they do is help the unionized taxi monopolies that some big cities have. Similar, same kind of thing is going on here. Every regulation. Now, we had some good Supreme Court decisions lately on the EPA, for example, on wetlands, for example, just this last week. The EPA said that they seized control of every little pond and seized control over the property of every little pond that would collect from rainfall. You couldn't even collect the rain that was falling on your own property under the EPA rules. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, that is going way overboard. The new conservative Supreme Court, as bad as it has been on things like abortion, it's moving in the correct direction on things like the scope and the power of federal regulations. So one little silver lining behind all this is that it appears that federal regulatory agencies may get a little wing clipping as they've been starting to get from the Supreme Court. Now you have to, for the wetlands rule to apply, your water has to actually be part of a continuous navigable water stream, which was the original intent of the Clean Water Act, as they've interpreted it. Still not perfect. Even that regulation isn't a good thing in my view, but at least the power, the unlimited power of something like the EPA is being cut back somewhat by the Supreme Court. But every single regulation like that does contribute to less business, less economic prosperity, higher costs for entering business, more monopolistic abuses by companies that get sort of special protection.
Okay, well, that's all the super chats we have. I mean, there were interesting questions and comments that we didn't get to in the regular chat, but this only tells me, especially considering how late we announced today's topic, that there is room for more of these, and
right.
we should definitely do this again soon. I mentioned at the beginning that next Monday is the 3-year anniversary. So, I mean, I encourage people to watch Daily Objective every day, but next week, so that is going to be a different episode from the usual celebratory telethon style episodes that we have. We'll still obviously be encouraging everybody to financially contribute and support us. But we're going to be doing it a bit differently. We're going to do some different things during that episode, including at least one very big announcement. So yeah, tune in. I encourage you to tune in live if you can. And we do have one more super chat that just came in, and then I will say some more things. Adherent of Lady Columbia. Are we in an era of a mix of the 60s and 70s with the cultural and legal practices we see being played out? I wonder because I can look at past eras that were much worse by most metrics and practices.
Yes, in a lot of the basic metrics, America has gotten better and better and better over time. There were periods in which, as I say, crime increased. The first, you could say, was with the Prohibition, when America passed a federal law prohibiting the sale and distribution of alcohol as such. That led to a huge wave of crime. Organized crime was subsidized. We released Al Capone, and the classic era of violence on the streets with the Tommy guns and the gangsters broke out as a direct result of Prohibition. As a direct result of Prohibition, crime had been declining in America up to that point dramatically. Once Prohibition came in, organized crime got subsidized. Drinking became a crime. Crime as such just shot up like a bat out of heck. And it was only after Prohibition that began to come down. We then declared war on drugs. We then had all kinds of legal reforms. For example, an exclusionary rule, the Miranda decision, which required rights be read and waived before any statements, confessions by an accused become admissible. When that happened, there was another outbreak of crime in America in the late 1960s and 70s. Commemorated by such films as the Dirty Harry movies of Clint Eastwood, or what was that Charles Bronson movie where he became a vigilante. That period was a terrible period of crime in America's cities. But again, we got past that, it seems to me, when we began to get a little more tough on the enforcement of crimes, especially gun crimes, violent crimes, things like that. But those reforms also included a whole bunch of mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug crimes, which were racially disproportionate in their effect. And those have been cut back a little bit too. But the current wave is not as bad as those previous waves of crime. They are not as bad as what Prohibition set loose or what was set loose in the late 60s and 70s. We're still a bit safer. On the other hand, than we were then, using the statistics we have. On the other hand, these leftist DAs are, in effect, refusing to enforce their state laws, and crime is becoming rampant, especially America's big cities.
We got 2 more super chats from Bonnie and from Red, who says, thank you, James and Razi. Thank you both. And thank you everybody who tuned in and everybody who contributed. Like I said, it could have been a much longer episode. It can't, in part because in 20 minutes, I will be on Ricardo Ibanez's podcast. Some of you may know him. It's Ricardo's Time is the name of the podcast. If you want to tune in, that's going to be live. He has been on this channel on the Daily Objective once when we about 2 years ago when we were discussing the European Super League in football, or soccer as you call it in America. Yeah, and I think Daniel can put the link for that in the chat. We also have, of course, HBTV in 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's another Ask Me Anything. It's Ask Harry Anything. So you can tune into that. Of course, for HBTV, it is a £20 minimum for super chats because we get a lot of super chats. for that, as we did today. Maybe we should make these more expensive. But anyway, thanks again, everybody. We will be back with the daily objective tomorrow. So see you then. Bye.
Be well.